It was a quiet evening in a small town. The streets were almost empty, and only the sound of dogs barking could be heard from far away. Inside the hospital, nurses were preparing for the night shift when the emergency doors suddenly opened. A young woman rushed in, crying, holding her little boy in her arms. Her name was Emily, and in her shaking hands lay her 3-year-old son, Noah. His face was pale, his small body still. The nurse called for the doctor, and within seconds the child was taken to the emergency room. Emily kept whispering, "Please, please save him." The doctors tried everything they could. They pressed on his chest, gave him oxygen, called his name again and again. But after a few minutes the room went silent. The doctor looked at Emily with tired eyes and slowly said, "I'm sorry." "He's gone," Emily screamed. Her voice echoed through the hospital halls. She kept saying, "It was an accident. He fell from the stairs. I just looked away for a moment." But one nurse, Lisa, noticed something strange. There were bruises on the child's arms. Not just 1 or 2, but many. Some looked old, some were fresh. Lisa quietly told the doctor, "These don't look like injuries from one fall." The doctor nodded slightly and wrote a short note on the file. Something was not right. The police were called. Detective Sarah Miller, a calm but sharp investigator, arrived within minutes. She watched Emily carefully. The mother looked terrified, but there was something else in her eyes, fear mixed with guilt. Sarah asked, "Emily, can you tell me what happened?" Emily's voice broke as she said, "He fell. He was running down the stairs. I tried to stop him but couldn't." Sarah nodded but didn't believe it completely. She had seen too many cases where things were not as they seemed. Later, Sarah visited Emily's small apartment. The house was clean, almost too clean, as if someone had tried to hide something. On the living room carpet, she saw a faint red stain that looked recently scrubbed. The air smelled of strong cleaning chemicals. In the kitchen sat Jake, Emily's boyfriend. He looked calm, maybe too calm. He didn't cry or ask questions. He only said it was an accident. Kids fall all the time. His eyes were cold, his tone flat. Sarah noticed his hands were rough with small cuts on his knuckles. "How did you get those?" she asked. Jake shrugged. "Work injury." When Sarah left the house, she spoke to the neighbors. One old woman said, "We often heard the boy crying at night. Loud cries, sometimes for hours. But when we asked, Emily said he had nightmares." Another neighbor added, "That boyfriend of hers, he had a bad temper. We heard shouting almost every night." The more Sarah heard, the more her mind filled with questions. If it was just a fall, why so many bruises? Why were the neighbors talking about screams? And why did the boyfriend look so calm after the child's death? Back at the hospital, the doctor approached Sarah. "Detective," he said quietly, "this child has injuries that are not from one day. Some are weeks old. I think you should order an autopsy." Sarah's heart sank. She had feared this. She looked through the glass at Emily, sitting alone in the waiting room holding her son's small toy car. Tears ran down her face as she whispered something to herself again and again. The detective stepped outside into the cold night air. The wind blew softly, but she felt a chill run down her spine. Something dark had happened inside that house. Something that Emily wasn't saying, and Jake was hiding. As the hospital lights glowed behind her, Sarah whispered, "If this was not an accident, then someone wanted this child gone." The story had only begun, but one thing was clear. The truth behind Noah's death would shake everyone in that small town. Detective Sarah Miller couldn't sleep that night. The image of the small boy's pale face kept flashing in her mind. She had seen many sad cases before, but something about this one felt different. It wasn't just the death, it was the silence that followed it. The kind of silence that hides secrets. Early the next morning, Sarah arrived at the police station. She placed the file labeled Noah Parker, age 3, on her desk and began reading the report again. Cause of death, still under investigation. Possible accident. But deep down, she didn't believe it. She decided to visit the house again. This time, she wanted to look carefully. Every corner, every stain, every shadow that could tell a story. When she knocked on the door, Emily opened it. Her eyes were swollen from crying. Her voice was weak. "Detective, do you know when I can take my son home?" Sarah replied gently, "I'm sorry, Emily, but we have ordered an autopsy. We need to know what really happened." Emily froze. For a moment, her face turned pale. "Autopsy? But it was an accident," she whispered. Sarah looked at her quietly. "Then there's nothing to worry about, right?" Inside, Jake was sitting on the couch watching TV. He barely looked up. "Still digging?" he said with a smirk. Sarah ignored the comment. She scanned the room. The same faint red stain was still there, hidden under the carpet edge. She noticed something else, too. A small shoe lying near the sofa, torn and dirty. "Mind if I look around?" Sarah asked. Jake shrugged. "Do whatever you want. I've got nothing to hide." But his voice didn't sound confident. It sounded tired and angry. Sarah moved through the rooms, taking notes. In Noah's bedroom, she found drawings taped on the wall. Colorful crayon sketches of a sun, a house, and stick figures. But one picture caught her attention. It showed a sad little boy and a tall man with dark scribbles around him. The man had angry eyes drawn in thick black lines. "Did Noah draw this?" Sarah asked. Emily nodded slowly. "Yes, he said it was just a monster." Sarah folded the drawing carefully and put it into her file. She didn't say a word, but her mind was racing. Later that day, Sarah spoke to the neighbor again, Mrs. Cooper, who lived next door. "I heard shouting the night before the boy died," Mrs. Cooper said. "It was around midnight. The man was yelling something like, 'Keep him quiet.' Then everything went silent." Sarah asked, "Did you tell anyone?" Mrs. Cooper looked down. "I didn't want to get involved. I thought it was just a family fight." Back at the station, Sarah met with Dr. Allen, the pathologist who was conducting the autopsy. He said, "Detective, I'll have the full report tomorrow, but I can already tell you this. The bruises are not from one fall. Some are old, at least a few weeks." Sarah sighed. "So it's abuse?" Dr. Allen nodded sadly. "Yes, repeated abuse." That night, Sarah returned to her desk and stared at the photos. Noah's smiling picture from the hospital file, and the cold eyes of Jake from her report. She compared the two and whispered, "What kind of man hurts a child?" At that moment, Officer Dan entered. "Ma'am, we found something. Security camera footage from the building across the street." Sarah leaned forward. "Show me." On the screen, the footage showed Emily's apartment door. Around 10:45 p.m., the night before Noah's death, Jake could be seen leaving the apartment in a hurry. He looked angry, slamming the door behind him. A few minutes later, the lights went out. Sarah stared at the screen. "Where did he go after that?" "We're tracking it now," Dan replied. Sarah knew she was close to something big, something terrible. She stood up, grabbed her coat, and whispered to herself, "He's hiding something, and I'm going to find it." The cold wind hit her face as she stepped outside the station. Somewhere in that dark town, behind closed doors, lay the truth about a little boy named Noah, and the man who might have been his monster. The next morning, Detective Sarah Miller arrived early at the police station. The city was still waking up. Cold air, silent streets, a soft orange glow from the rising sun. She didn't sleep all night. Her mind kept replaying Noah's small face and the mother's trembling voice. On her desk lay a white envelope marked "Confidential Autopsy Report." Sarah's hands felt heavy as she opened it. She read slowly, line by line, and with each sentence her chest tightened. Multiple bruises in different healing stages. Old fractures on ribs. Internal bleeding in the abdomen. Cause of death: blunt force trauma. Sarah closed her eyes for a moment. This was not an accident. It was a pattern of pain. A child who suffered quietly for weeks, maybe months. She stood up and walked straight to the hospital. Dr. Allen, the pathologist, was waiting for her in his office. His face was pale. He had done this job for years, but some cases still broke him. "Detective," he said softly, handing her photos, "look at this." The images showed dark marks on Noah's body, on his back, his arms, and his stomach. These bruises were made by strong hands, the doctor continued. And not all at once. Some are at least a month old. Whoever did this kept doing it. Sarah felt her throat go dry. So it's confirmed? Child abuse? Dr. Allen nodded. Yes, and the final blow was hard enough to rupture his organs. He must have been in terrible pain. Sarah looked at the doctor, her voice barely steady. Did the mother know? Dr. Allen hesitated. Hard to say, but I think she suspected. The injuries were too visible to miss. As Sarah left the hospital, the wind blew stronger. She got into her car and sat quietly. Outside, people were starting their normal day. Children going to school, mothers holding their hands. But one small boy would never walk again. She whispered, "Who could do this to a child?" Back at the station, Sarah called Emily in for questioning. The young mother arrived with red eyes, clutching a tissue in her hand. She looked weaker than before, as if she hadn't eaten or slept. Sarah began softly. "Emily, the autopsy results are out. They tell a very different story." Emily's eyes widened. "What do you mean?" Sarah laid the photos on the table. Bruises, marks, fractures. "These are not from one fall. Your son was hurt many times before he died." Emily's lips trembled. No, that can't be true." Sarah leaned forward. "Did Jake ever hurt him?" Emily shook her head quickly. "No. Jake loved Noah. He played with him. He would never—" She stopped mid-sentence. Her hands started to shake. Sarah noticed the fear in her eyes. The kind that comes from remembering something you wish you could forget. "Emily," she said softly, "I need the truth. You can't protect him anymore." Tears rolled down Emily's cheeks. She whispered, "He used to get angry. When Noah cried too much or spilled food, he'd shout, sometimes hit him. But he always said it was just to teach him." Sarah's heart sank. "And the night Noah died?" Emily covered her face. "He hit him again. I told him to stop, but he said I spoiled the boy. Then Noah fell and he stopped moving. I panicked. Jake told me to say it was an accident, or he'd hurt me too." The room went silent. The only sound was Emily's quiet sobbing. Sarah stood slowly, her voice firm now. "Thank you, Emily. You did the right thing by telling me. We'll take it from here." When Emily left, Sarah looked out the window. The truth was out, but it brought no relief, only anger. She called Officer Dan. "We have enough evidence. I want Jake brought in. Now." Outside, thunder rolled in the distance. The calm town was about to witness the dark truth behind a child's death. Sarah looked at Noah's photo on her desk and whispered, "You'll get justice, little one. I promise." The sound of heavy rain filled the small police station as Detective Sarah Miller waited in the interrogation room. The gray walls felt colder that day. On the table lay the case file, thick, full of photos, reports, and pain. The door opened and Officer Dan stepped in. "He's here," Dan said quietly. Jake walked in, wearing a plain black jacket, his face calm but his eyes sharp. He sat down, handcuffed, and leaned back with a smirk. Sarah studied him silently for a few seconds. "Jake," she began, her voice steady, "we have the autopsy report. We know Noah didn't die from a fall." Jake laughed lightly. "You think I killed him? You people love your stories, don't you?" Sarah placed the photos on the table. Bruises, broken ribs, marks that told a silent story. These are not from one day. Someone kept hurting that boy for weeks. Jake looked down, then smirked again. "Maybe the kid was clumsy. Kids fall, kids get hurt. You can't blame me for that." Sarah leaned closer. "But we can blame you for lying." His smile faded. "I didn't lie." "Emily told us everything," Sarah said. For the first time, Jake's eyes twitched. His calm mask began to crack. He crossed his arms and looked away. That woman would say anything to save herself. Sarah opened the file and pulled out a drawing, Noah's crayon sketch of a tall man with black scribbles around him. "He drew this. Said it was a monster. Looks familiar." Jake looked at the picture for a second, then laughed. A dry and bitter laugh. "You think a drawing proves something?" Sarah's tone hardened. "It proves what that little boy felt every night." Jake's jaw tightened. His hands shook slightly and Sarah noticed. "You hated him, didn't you?" she said quietly. "You thought he came between you and Emily." He slammed his hands on the table. "That kid ruined everything. Every time I tried to talk to her, he cried, screamed, made her run to him. She never looked at me like she looked at him." The room went silent after his outburst. Rain hit the window harder, echoing his anger. Sarah spoke softly. "So, you hit him." Again and again. Until one day, he couldn't take it anymore. Jake sat back, breathing heavily, his eyes dark and cold now. "He just wouldn't stop crying," he muttered. "I told him to shut up. I didn't mean to kill him. He was just so annoying." Sarah's heart sank. There it was. The truth she already knew but never wanted to hear. Later, outside the room, Officer Dan asked, "So that's it? He confessed?" Sarah nodded slowly. "Yes, he confessed to his own monster." Meanwhile, in another room, Emily sat quietly with a police counselor. Her face was pale, her hands trembling. She whispered, "I should have left him. I saw what he did, but I thought it would stop. I thought he loved me." The counselor said gently, "Sometimes fear blinds love, Emily. You can't change the past, but you can speak for your son now." Emily nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I'll testify," she said. That evening, as Sarah walked out of the station, the storm finally started to fade. She looked up at the dark sky. The rain had washed the streets clean, but the darkness inside human hearts couldn't be washed away so easily. At home, Sarah sat on her couch, staring at Noah's file again. She whispered to herself, "He was just 3. He never got a chance to live, to laugh, to be safe." Her phone rang. It was Officer Dan. "Ma'am, we found something else. Jake's old record. 2 years ago, he was charged for assaulting a neighbor's child. The case was dropped after the family moved away." Sarah closed her eyes, anger rising in her chest. So, he's done this before. She hung up and whispered, "And Emily never knew who she let into her home?" Outside, the sky was clearing, but inside Sarah's mind, new clouds were forming. She knew the case was far from over. The next battle would be in court, and she had to make sure this time justice didn't fail. She looked at Noah's picture once more and said softly, "Your story won't be forgotten. Not while I'm still breathing." The courtroom was full that morning. Reporters filled the back rows, their cameras ready, pens scratching on notepads. The people of the small town had come too. Everyone wanted to see the man accused of killing a child. The air felt heavy, thick with whispers and judgment. Detective Sarah Miller sat quietly near the witness stand, her eyes on Jake, who stood at the defense table in his prison uniform. His face was emotionless, but his eyes still held that same cold confidence she remembered from the interrogation room. On the other side sat Emily, her head low, fingers trembling as she clutched a tissue. She looked like a ghost of her former self, tired, broken, but determined to tell the truth this time. The judge entered. Everyone stood. Then the trial began. The prosecutor, Mr. Howard, started strong. "Your Honor, this case is not about an accident. It is about abuse, silent, cruel, and repeated. The evidence will show that Jake Turner didn't lose his temper once. He made a child's life a living nightmare." Jake's lawyer, a sharp man in a gray suit, quickly stood up. "My client loved that child. The mother, Emily Parker, is lying to save herself. There's no proof that Jake caused the fatal injury." But there was proof, and Sarah knew it. The first witness was Dr. Allen, the pathologist. He spoke calmly, showing the autopsy photos. "These injuries are not from one fall. Some are weeks old. The final blow caused internal bleeding. This was not an accident. It was assault." The courtroom fell silent. Even Jake's lawyer looked uneasy. Then it was Emily's turn. She walked to the stand slowly, her legs shaking. Sarah could see her fear, but also her courage. The judge reminded her to tell the truth, and she nodded. "Emily," the prosecutor said softly, "can you tell the court what happened the night your son died?" Emily took a deep breath. That night Jake got angry. Noah spilled juice on the floor, and Jake started shouting. I told him to stop, but he pushed Noah. He fell. Then Jake hit him again. I screamed, but he told me to shut up. Tears ran down her face. Noah stopped moving. I tried to wake him up, but he wouldn't open his eyes. Jake's lawyer shouted, "Objection! She's making this up." The judge looked at him sternly. "Overruled. Let her continue," Emily sobbed. He told me to say it was an accident. He said if I didn't, he'd kill me too. The courtroom gasped. Sarah watched Jake. His face turned red, his jaw clenched, but he said nothing. Then the prosecutor turned to him. "Mr. Turner, you said you loved the child. Is this how you show love, by breaking his ribs?" Jake slammed his hand on the table. "You don't understand. He wasn't mine. He ruined everything." The judge banged the gavel. "Order in the court." That one sentence from Jake, "He wasn't mine," was enough. The jury looked shocked. It was the moment his mask truly fell off. After hours of testimony, the jury left to decide. The wait felt endless. Emily sat with her head bowed, praying. Sarah watched the clock, every tick echoing like thunder. Finally, the door opened. The jurors returned. The foreman stood and said clearly, "We find the defendant, Jake Turner, guilty of murder in the first degree." The courtroom erupted in emotion. Some cried, some sighed in relief. Emily broke down, covering her face as tears of grief and release poured out. Jake was led away in handcuffs, his eyes full of rage but no regret. He shouted, "She made me do it! She made me!" But no one listened anymore. The judge spoke firmly. "Jake Turner, you are sentenced to life imprisonment without parole." As the gavel struck, silence filled the room again. Justice, though late, had finally spoken. Sarah stood outside the courthouse watching the gray clouds move across the sky. She took a deep breath and whispered, "You can rest now, Noah. It's over." But deep inside, she knew. The scars left behind would never truly fade. Months had passed since the trial ended. The small town had gone back to its quiet rhythm. But for those who lived through the case, nothing truly felt the same. The story of little Noah Parker still echoed in every corner, in the papers, in the whispers, and most of all, in the hearts of those who had seen the truth. Detective Sarah Miller stood outside the town cemetery, holding a small bunch of white flowers. The wind was gentle that morning, and the sky was covered in soft gray clouds. She walked slowly toward a small grave marked with a simple stone that read, "Noah Parker, 2020, 2023, a little angel who deserved the world." She knelt down, placed the flowers, and whispered, "You got justice, little one. I just wish we found you sooner." Her voice broke for a moment. She had solved many cases before, but this one had left a mark on her soul. It wasn't just about finding the killer. It was about the life that was lost too soon, and the silence that allowed it to happen. Behind her, footsteps crunched on the gravel. She turned and saw Emily approaching, holding a small teddy bear, Noah's favorite toy. Her face looked different now. Still sad, but stronger. She placed the bear beside the flowers and whispered softly, "Hi, baby. Mommy's here." For a moment, neither woman spoke. The only sound was the wind moving through the trees. Sarah finally said, "How have you been holding up?" Emily gave a faint smile. "I'm trying. I go to therapy now. The nightmares still come, but they're not as sharp anymore." "That's good," Sarah said quietly. "Healing takes time," Emily nodded. "I still see him in my dreams sometimes. He's always smiling. No bruises, no fear. Just smiling." She looked up at the detective. "Thank you, Sarah. You didn't give up, even when I was too scared to speak." Sarah shook her head. "You were brave, Emily. You spoke when it mattered most." They stood there in silence again, both staring at the small grave, two women from different worlds brought together by tragedy. After a few minutes, Emily said, "I want to start something. A small foundation for abused children. In Noah's name. Maybe it can help someone else escape before it's too late." Sarah smiled gently. "That's a beautiful idea. He'd be proud of you." Emily wiped her tears and walked away slowly, leaving Sarah alone by the grave. As Sarah turned to leave, she looked back one last time. In her heart, she felt a strange calm, like the little boy's spirit was finally free. Later that evening, she returned to her office. The walls were lined with old case files, crime photos, and newspaper clippings. But one photo stood alone on her desk: Noah's smiling face. Beneath it, Sarah had written one line in pen: "Sometimes the smallest voices speak the loudest truths." She sat down, opened her journal, and began to write. She wrote about fear, about silence, and about how easy it is to miss the signs: the bruises hidden under long sleeves, the quiet cries behind closed doors. Her words were simple but strong. Monsters don't always hide in the dark. Sometimes they live in plain sight, inside homes, behind smiles, beneath excuses. But truth always finds a way to surface, and when it does, justice follows. As she finished writing, the phone rang. Another case, another story waiting to be told. Sarah took a deep breath, grabbed her coat, and whispered, "Let's make sure no other child is silenced." The camera fades to black as the sound of a child's laughter echoes softly. Not haunting this time, but peaceful, like a memory finally laid to rest. Then the narrator's voice speaks slowly, with emotion. Noah's story reminds us, when we see signs of pain, we must speak. Silence can kill, but one voice can save a life. If you ever suspect a child is being hurt, don't look away. Be their voice. The screen fades to white text, dedicated to all the children who never got the chance to grow up. Speak up, stand up, stop the silence. And with that, the story ends, not just with justice, but with a message that lingers long after the final word.